Welcome to the All Sorts podcast. We're diving deep today, deep into the life of Ganga Zumba, the king of Quilombo dos Palmares. We got some fascinating sources here, so yeah, let's get right into it.
You know, it's interesting, right? This idea of Palmares, it's more than just a place to hide out.
Yeah.
A refuge. It was really like a vibrant society. It was evolving in 17th century Brazil at a time when, the sugar trade, it was fueling this brutal system of slavery.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, it wasn't just survival for them. Yeah. It was thriving. Imagine escaping that system.
Yeah.
Finding yourself in these dense forests, the mountains of Pernambuco, and not just hiding, but building this complex society that blends African traditions with, adaptations to this new world that they found themselves in.
And right at the heart of all of this was Ganga Zumba. Some accounts suggest, he wasn't just some, average runaway slave. He may have descended from Congo royalty.
Wow.
If that's true, imagine being ripped from a position of power, sold into slavery, and then rising again to lead a rebellion.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
What a story, I mean. Resilience and leadership. Speaking of leadership, I was struck by something. His name, Ganga Zumba, wasn't actually his birth name.
Oh, okay.
It was a title, Ganga Zumba.
Right.
What do you think that tells us about the structure and culture of Palmares?
I think it tells us a lot.
Yeah.
Ganga and Zumba implies a spiritual leader, someone who protects the community. So that tells us that Palmares wasn't just this random group of people who had escaped slavery.
Right.
They actually had this deliberate structure that drew upon their African heritage. They were really intentionally recreating elements of their past in this new environment.
That's so insightful. It wasn't just about physical escape. It was also cultural. It was about identity in the face of all that oppression.
Yeah.
So paint a picture for our listener. What did Palmares actually look like back then?
Okay, so imagine bustling towns, skilled artisans, a really complex social structure with elected chiefs, and Ganga Zumba, their king, living in a palace. This wasn't just survival. It was a thriving, independent kingdom in colonial Brazil.
That's wild.
Yeah.
That is amazing. I'm also curious about some of the debates surrounding Palmares. Was it really this perfect utopia, equality, like some sources say, or was it more complicated?
Yeah, that's where it gets really nuanced, because some sources do paint this picture of a harmonious society where everyone is equal, but then others hint at a more complex community.
Oh, interesting.
It maybe mirrored some of the power structures they had in Africa.
Oh, okay.
It's a good reminder that history isn't always black and white,
Yeah.
It's good to be cautious about romanticizing the past.
You're right. Okay, so we have this kingdom, a symbol of resistance.
Yeah.
But it's under constant threat from the Portuguese.
Yeah.
Decades of battles. By the 1670s, things are different. There's a sense of weariness.
Yeah.
Particularly for Ganga Zumba, who's getting older.
And that weariness, that exhaustion, that leads to this pivotal moment in 1678. Ganga Zumba, he sees how much the fighting has taken from his people. And he sees a chance for peace. He enters into a treaty with the Portuguese governor.
This peace treaty, it came with a huge price tag, though, didn't it? Relocation. Palmares had to move closer to Portuguese control, essentially right under their thumb. Was Ganga Zumba naive to think that this would bring peace?
It's tough to say. On one hand, there were years of warfare. They were exhausted. He might have seen this as the only option to secure a future for his people. On the other hand, you can definitely see how people might perceive this as a betrayal, surrendering their hard-won autonomy.
Yeah, and that's where we see this clash between Ganga Zumba and his nephew, Zumbi.
Right.
Zumbi was this fierce warrior. He saw the treaty as a trap, a path back to, being subjugated, a family divided.
Absolutely, and it speaks to this larger question, which resonates even today. When do you compromise? And when is it a betrayal of your ideals? It's a tough question.
Yeah, it's really hard. It makes you think about the weight of leadership, the impossible choices that people in those positions have to make. And in Ganga Zumba's case, his choice led to tragedy.
Just 2 years after the treaty, in 1680, Ganga Zumba dies. And sources point to poisoning.
Wow.
Yeah. It's a mystery, Was he poisoned by the Portuguese to make sure the treaty stayed in place? Or was it someone within Palmares, those who thought he was getting in the way of their resistance?
Either way, it's tragic. Trying to protect his people's future, but maybe that wasn't even his choice to make. Heavy stuff.
It really is. And it makes you think about the other paths Palmares could have taken. Did his death end his vision of peace?
Well, his brother Ganga Zumba took over and tried to uphold the treaty. They kept that Kuka settlement going. Did it work?
Sadly, no. That settlement basically disappeared from history. A lot of its residents ended up enslaved again. Really shows how fragile that peace was that Ganga Zumba was trying for.
And what about Zumbi? Always so wary of the Portuguese. What happened to him? Did he fade away when the treaty collapsed?
Actually, quite the opposite. He became a symbol of resistance. He led Palmares for another 15 years against the whole force of the Portuguese.
It's like a David and Goliath story. This small kingdom fighting for freedom against a major European power for decades. How did they pull that off?
A few things helped. They were amazing at guerrilla warfare, using the land to their advantage, the forests, the mountains. Plus, they knew their enemy well, and they had this burning commitment to their freedom.
And that must have been so inspiring for other enslaved people, beyond Palmares itself.
Totally. Their stand inspired others to resist, to escape, to fight for their own liberation. Palmares became this beacon of hope, proof that you could fight for your freedom. It's a symbol that's lasted through the centuries to today.
Okay, so we've talked about Palmares, the fight for freedom. Let's look closer at Ganga Zumba's legacy. Is he seen as a hero in Brazil today alongside Zumbi?
It's complicated. It's not as simple as Zumbi's. For many, he's the one who tried to compromise with the oppressors, even as slavery was still happening. And that poisoning really reinforces that image of a failed compromise.
That makes sense. Zumbi, refusing to back down, fighting till the end. That image is much stronger, especially for Black Brazilians. He's the symbol of resistance against that system.
That's true. But there are more people today who are taking a second look at Ganga Zumba's role. Some historians say his search for peace was just being realistic, recognizing how much pressure Palmares was under. He reminds us that history isn't simple, and leadership comes with these really tough choices.
Yeah, that's a good point. There were other groups of escaped slaves in the Americas, like in Suriname, Jamaica, who made treaties with colonial powers. Maybe Ganga Zumba was just doing what he thought was best in a really impossible situation.
Exactly. That's what makes history so fascinating. It's not about judging easily. It's about trying to understand the past. Even the most well-intentioned leaders sometimes make decisions with tragic results. And even those decisions are part of history. They add to the complexity.
So how is Palmares remembered today? Is it just a historical footnote, or does it still have a presence in Brazil?
Palmares is much more than a footnote. For Black Brazilians, it's a powerful symbol. It represents their centuries-long fight for freedom and equality.
Like some sort of national monument?
Yes. The Serra da Barriga, where their main settlement was, is a national monument now. There are cultural events, pilgrimages. People go there to connect with that history, to remember, to reflect, and honor the fight against a cruel system.
And of course, there's Black Consciousness Day every November 20th, the anniversary of Zumbi's death. It's a day for reflection.
Right. It's a day to think about slavery, to celebrate Black culture, and to push for racial justice in Brazil and across the world. It reminds us that the fight for equality is still happening. The ideals of Palmares are still important today.
It's amazing that this small kingdom created out of slavery still has such a big impact today. The desire for freedom, the resilience, the fight for equality, these themes resonate through history and inspire us all. As we've been talking about Ganga Zumba and Palmares, something keeps coming back to me. You mentioned it earlier. It wasn't just about physical survival for them,
right,
but cultural survival too.
So it's so important. They built a society that took their African heritage and combined it with this new world they were in. They weren't just copying what they knew. They made something new.
Right.
Resilient. A mix of cultures born out of their fight for freedom.
It was like they were taking charge of their own story.
Exactly.
Not letting their culture disappear. Even with all that oppression, They were actively creating their identity in a new place.
Yeah, it was defiance. Saying, we're not going to be assimilated. We're holding on to who we are, even if we have to fight for it. And that fight to keep their culture alive, that's something we see throughout history, even today.
So how did this connect to the bigger picture? Why should we still care about this story today, centuries later?
It reminds us that people always want freedom to make their own choices. It shows that even in really dark times, hope can exist. People can resist. Communities can come together to challenge injustice, to fight for something better.
It shows the power of people working together.
Right.
To make the world better for themselves and their children, even if it means going up against powerful forces.
Absolutely. And for us today, it's about understanding history.
Yeah.
Not just dates and names.
Right.
But as something to inspire us, to guide us. Palmares shows us the fight for equality isn't over.
Right.
And we can learn from those who came before.
So as we finish up our deep dive into Ganga Zumba and Palmares, we'll leave you with this. How does this story speak to you today? What connections do you see between their fight for freedom and what we face now?
Think about it.
Yeah.
Whether it's social justice, protecting our planet, or just trying to make the world a fairer place, Palmares shows us we can be determined to build a better future. It's a call to action, a reminder that we can make a difference, like the people of Palmares did all those years ago.
It's a story about hope, resilience, and never giving up on freedom. And that's a story that will always matter. If you've been inspired by Ganga Zumba's journey, we encourage you to check out the other stories we tell on the All Sorts podcast.
We have tons of fascinating deep dives waiting for you.
Just a click away on YouTube. Hit that subscribe button to become part of our community of curious minds. Explore the world with us.
And don't forget to find us on X, Instagram, and Threads for more content and share your thoughts about this episode. We love hearing from you.
Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep the spirit of Palmares alive in your own way.